Hello, this is Henry. I go to this high school youth group here. I go to La Jolla High, and today I'm going to be reading Genesis 22, verse 1 through 14. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on that boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw the ram, caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The word of the Lord.
All right, well, welcome to Youth and Family Sunday. My name's Harry. I'm the family pastor here at La Jolla Christian Fellowship, and I hope it's been enjoyable to have the kids. I know we got a couple kids on coffee team and greeting, and we'll have that second service as well. Part of our goal was to get the kids volunteering here, but the other part of our goal was to get you a taste of what we try to do for our kids on a Sunday morning, kind of what goes on in the middle school and high school every Sunday morning. So to give you a taste of that, so that's why you're seeing Michael and Zelda. We've been partnered with them for 4 years, and they've been great. We get confused a lot, but he has a mustache, I wear glasses. We're clearly different people. And so we partnered with them. We got that great sermon bumper that Vinny and I put together, all this stuff. So we wanted to bring you into, this is what we do for the youth, because otherwise, how would you know? So that's what we're trying to do today. And sure, you can clap for that. Stoked. That's awesome. Let's go. So one thing we've also been doing is we've been studying the life of Abraham. So we've been going with the kids from Genesis 12 to Genesis 22. We're finishing that today. Most of them will be here to hear that second service. So we're taking a pause from Revelation. For some of you, that is a welcome pause, as that's a heavy book, right? It's a heavy study. For others of you, maybe you were just eager to hear Revelation today, and I apologize. But we're going to be in Genesis 22 today and studying the life of Abraham. And one thing about Abraham, as we've looked through his life, is there's this reoccurring theme in his life where he starts out, God will call him, he'll tell him where to go, what to do, and he always starts out so faithful and obedient. I love that about Abraham. But as he goes down the road, as he sees the road ahead of him, so often in his life, when the road ahead looks treacherous or challenging or difficult, Abraham decides to take matters into his own hands and go a different path, a different direction. We had taken, this summer, Vinny and I took some middle schoolers to, it's the water park, what's it called? Six Flags Water Park, yeah, Hurricane Harbor, Six Flags Water Park. And so we took them for the summer, and there's this massive slide there, and it's like, it's the tallest slide I've ever seen, and this thing is like a 90-degree drop. Like, this thing is steep, right? And so, Vinny and I are like MMA guys. We're like, we're tough, right? We got this. And so Vinny and I and one of our kids named Dan, we're heading up the stairs, and we're making our trek up the stairs, but we start to notice that not that many people are going down the slides. Everyone's choosing a different slide. And we're starting to get a little nervous, We're like, oh, why? No one's really going down this thing. This thing's really steep. Like, I'm pretty high up. And something about me is when I get nervous, I get quiet. I'm focused. I'm fight or flight. Like, I'm quiet. So that's what I do when I get nervous. My boy Vinny, when he gets nervous, he gets chatty. He's like, dude, I don't know about this slide, man. I don't know, man. Like, I haven't seen anyone go down. I mean, that one girl went down it, but I didn't even see her come out, man. Like, I don't know. You think we could do this? It's got to be safe. When was the last time this was checked? I'm like, Vinny, shut up, man. I am focused. I'm going down this slide, like, eyes forward. Like, I'm in front, right? I'm going. And so I go first. And the way this thing works is you get in this tube. So you stand in this tube. You're standing straight up. They shut the tube. And they start to play an audio of a heartbeat, going boom, 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 boom. And then a trap door beneath your feet as you're standing. Oh, like, how they used to hang people back in the day? Like, that's what we're dealing with at this water park. So the trap door opens beneath your feet, and you rush down, and it's so steep. And you're like, wow, Harry, it sounds like you're speaking from experience. No, because I made my way up the stairs. I got myself in the tube. I heard the heartbeat. But I made one crucial mistake. I looked down. And when I looked down, I discovered the cruelty of mankind. Because I looked down, and in my little trapdoor floor, they had left a large see-through square so that I could see the path before me. And I'll tell you what, the path before me was terrifying. I couldn't even see the slide beneath me. It was just a drop. And I got out that tube, man. I got out of the tube. I was like, no, not for me. I went down a different slide. And so the thing I'd intended to do, I didn't do. And that actually had a ripple effect because my boy Vinny didn't go down the slide. And then the kid we were with, he didn't go down the slide either. I mean, just a ripple effect through the crowd and a failure on our part. But this is what Abraham often does. He makes his way up the stairs. He's on his way. He's trusting in the promise of God. He's got his path set. And then when things get difficult, he veers another direction. Genesis chapter 12, God says to Abraham, I'm going to build a nation from you. I'm going to give you children. I'm going to build a nation out of you. And so leave your father's house, go to the land I'm going to show you. And he starts out and he does that. And then when a famine hits the land, he goes to Egypt. And then Genesis chapter 16, they're still waiting on the promise of God. And he looks at the path ahead and they're getting older and older past childbearing years. And he's like, how's that promise going to work? And so he tries to build a family through Hagar, the slave girl, which they got from Egypt. And you see this pattern in Abraham's life, and it affects those all around him when he chooses a different route. But finally, and this is what's amazing about God, regardless of that, God stays true to his promise. And in Genesis chapter 21, his son Isaac is born to him in his old age. And then Genesis 22, where we pick up today, God has one more assignment for Abraham. So let's go ahead and read. Let's read verses 1 through 3 together. It says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. So God promises Isaac or God promises Abraham that through his son Isaac, he's going to bless the whole world. That's Genesis 12. And then in Genesis 22, he says to sacrifice him. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like, how is God going to keep his promise and bless the whole world if Abraham kills Isaac? And right away, we're told in verse 1, we're told this is a test. And I don't know about you, but I think when we read this passage, I don't love this test, right? When you read this at face value, like, we don't feel comfortable with a test like this. You're like, God, it seems like a cruel and odd test of loyalty, especially like for me as a new dad. My wife and I just had our first baby. Most of you know, right? His name's Jude. I think we got a cute picture of him to update you. He's the best, man. We love this little guy so much. And now, like, with our little family, I've become, like, we'll take him for walks around La Jolla, in his little stroller, get coffee. But I'm like the most defensive walker. Like, when I got my baby in a stroller, I'm walking, and I'm like, who are you? Like, put that down. You take 10 steps back. Like, I'm defensive in the streets of La Jolla. Like, I'm ready to defend my family, right? And cars, like, La Jolla drivers, man, like, I know, like, what's going on? I'll walk across the street. Some of you are like, yeah, I love that. We're all La Jolla drivers. And walking across the street, and like, cars will cut right in front of me and my baby in a stroller while we're, like, walking through the crosswalk. Like, I know it's none of us, right? It's not our church. It's La Jolla Prez, right? It's them. Just kidding. It's not them. Just kidding. Point is I'm defensive, right? I'm protective over my family. And so a test like this, especially if you have kids, I think kind of rubs you wrong. You're like, what's going on in this test? And what I want to prove today, what I want to show today, is that although, yes, this is a test, this is so much more than just a test. That there's so much depth and richness, and that this little story at the beginning in the first book of the Bible really outlines the whole meta-narrative of God. This is a very important story, and it's a lot more than just a test, so we're going to get into that. But to do that, we're going to we'll go through this story a little quickly, and then we're going to put it all together at the end. That's my plan. So let's keep reading verse 4 through 8. It says, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife as the two of them went on together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. So Abraham, in verse 4, it says he sees the place of sacrifice. And we might expect that this is the point in the story where he sees the road ahead, he sees the place of sacrifice, and he starts going a different direction. But something shifted in Abraham at this point in the story. Abraham continues onward. And look what he says to his servants. Verse 5, he tells his servants, stay here, stay put. I and the boy are going to go worship. And then what's he say? And then he says, and we are coming back to you. Why would he say that if he plans on sacrificing his son Isaac? Well, I guess we have two options, right? Either he's lying, right? Because kind of an awkward thing to explain to other people, like, hey, God told me to kill my son, so you hang out here, like, I'll be back. Like, that's probably an awkward, like, maybe he's just trying to skip that. How do you explain that? That's an option. The other option is that Abraham genuinely believes that he will sacrifice his son, and he also genuinely believes that his son will come down the hill with him. And I'll give you a hint. It's option 2. Option 2. And I know this from Hebrews. The Bible tells us, Hebrews chapter 11, 17 through 19 says this. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. So Abraham believes he's going to go kill his son, and then he also believes God's going to raise his son from the dead. Why? Because God keeps his promises. And God had promised that he'd bless the world through Isaac. And he knows, you know what? I've learned in my life that the Lord keeps his promises. I'm continuing on. And so he believes he must raise him from the dead. So let's see what happens. Let's keep going. Verse 9. Verse 9, it says, when they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son, Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." So Abraham goes to kill his son, and he believes that he's going to be raised from the dead. And then instead, God stops him. He stays his hand. He says, "Don't harm your boy." And Abraham looks up, and what he sees in the bushes is a substitute for Isaac. Is something that can die in the place of Isaac. It's Isaac's substitute in this lamb. And so Abraham names the place what? He names the place "The Lord will provide." What's the Lord going to provide? Happiness, wealth? No, a substitute. And then it starts being said about this place, the Bible tells us, that people started saying, "On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided." What will be provided? A substitute. And so what I want us to see today is that this whole incredible story, written thousands of years before Christ ever walked this earth, is this beautiful foreshadowing to the substitutionary death of Christ on the cross. And there's all these parallels in this story that make that very clear, as well as understanding some things about Mount Moriah. And so we're going to go through that. And to be honest, this was a really challenging sermon to put together because there's so much in here, so many details in here. And it's like painstaking to go through all the details and to package it nice for a little sermon so I can present it to you all clean. And so I was struggling a little bit to put this sermon together to the point where I was like, should I even preach this? Like, this is a hard sermon to write. And Pastor Adam, before he even knew what I was preaching on, he sent me a rap song. You know, your pastor sends you raps. And he sent me a rap song, a Christian rap song called "Ram in the Bush." And it was all about Genesis 22. And I was like, all right, Lord, I'll do it. Like, that's fine. That's fine. So if you don't like this sermon, take it up with the Lord. Just kidding. I also, as I was prepping and kind of struggling, my boy Vinny FaceTimed me, and I told him, "Hey, I'm busy. I'm working on this sermon, and I'm struggling with it." And Vinny was like, "Well, tell me about it. Like, why is it a struggle?" I was like, "Dude, there's like all these details." And I went through every single detail with Vinny. And at the end, he said this. He goes, "Yo, the Bible be Bibling." And I was like, "Yeah, that's true. The Bible be Bibling." And then he said this. He said, this was helpful to me. Really, it really was. This was helpful. He said, "Dude, just get up there and nerd out." And I was like, that's the right, yes. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to nerd out for a bit with your permission. I guess without your permission, I have the microphone. We're going to nerd out for a second and just go through this, because I think when you see the picture that thousands of years ago, before Christ walked this earth, Christ was foreshadowing his whole story. I think it's powerful. So let's look at this story. I put these parallels in your notes as well. We know that Isaac has a miraculous birth, right? We know that because he's born to his mother at 90 years old. His father's 100. This is a miraculous birth. That's well past popping out baby years, right? This is miraculous. Well, we know Christ himself has a miraculous birth as Christ was born to the Virgin Mary. We see in Genesis 22, verse 2, this statement of love and sonship. God says what? He says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and sacrifice him. Well, God says to Jesus at the very beginning of his ministry, before he sacrifices him, he says, this is my son, whom I love. In him I'm well pleased. We notice that in verse 6 of this story, Abraham, if you go to verse 6, Abraham makes Isaac carry the wood for his own sacrifice. Well, we're well aware that Christ, going up his mountain to be sacrificed, carries his wooden cross. We know that Isaac, by our context, I think Isaac is very clear, lays down his life willingly. The reason we know that is because Isaac at this time is like late teens, early 20s. There's reasons I could tell you about. We don't have a ton of time, but he's late teens, early 20s. He's made this trek before. You can tell in all the language. And his father's 100. Do you think he could have fought off his 100-year-old father and not be bound? Yeah, I think he could have. But he lays down his life willingly. We know Christ says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. He says, there's no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friend. So we know Christ lays down his life willingly. The book of Hebrews, that what we just quoted, tells us that figuratively, Isaac was raised from the dead. It says, in a way, because Abraham has received him back from death, in a way he did rise from the dead. Well, we know literally we believe Jesus rose from the dead. And we believe Jesus' resurrection happened when? On the third day. Well, if you go to verse 4, you know it reads, on the third day. So all takes place, his figurative resurrection takes place on the third day. He's sacrificed, we know from in verse 2, Isaac's supposed to be sacrificed in the region of Moriah. He goes to the region of Moriah. It's about a 2-day journey for Abraham, and he goes there, and that's where he's supposed to sacrifice his son. Well, would it encourage you to know that it's in the same mountain range of Moriah that Christ is sacrificed? I'll prove that to you in a bit, but I want you to know that that's true. And so thousands of years before, when Abraham names the place, the Lord will provide, and everyone started saying, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Well, 2,000 years later, in the same mountain range, Christ was substituted for you. We know that this substitute, that God provided a substitute for Isaac in this ram. God provides a substitute for the whole world in Christ, and that's called what? It's called the Lamb of God. The Bible be Bibling. Like, you see how this all comes together, right? We should get t-shirts that say that. We see how it all comes together, right? It's all about Jesus. This is why Jesus can stand and look at the Pharisees and say, you got your nose in the book and you're looking for morality and you're looking for all these things and all these rules, but the whole thing's about me standing right in front of you. It's all about Jesus. And I think this gets even better and richer when we study the mountain range of Moriah. So we're not quite done nerding out. We got to keep going. When we study the mountain range of Moriah, I think this gets even cooler. So Isaac is sacrificed here or substituted for here, right? We just talked about that. And then fast forward in time to 1 Chronicles chapter 21. 1 Chronicles 21, this is a little story about David. David has sinned, and God is judging Israel for David's sin in the form of he sends wrath. He sends his wrath in the form of plagues. Okay, so Israel is getting plagues because of King David's sin. And David goes to sacrifice. And the Bible tells us he goes to the same mountain of Moriah and he offers a sacrifice there. And because of his sacrifice offered on the mountain of Moriah, the Lord takes away his wrath from his people. We'll fast forward again to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 tells us that Solomon, David's son Solomon, he's the one who builds a temple. He builds a temple. And the Bible tells us, you can check my work because we just don't have time to read all of these. So it's 2 Chronicles 3, 1 through 4, if you want to check me. It tells us that it's on the same threshing floor, in the same mountain, that he starts construction of the temple where his father David had sacrificed and his forefather Abraham had brought Isaac. So in the same place, same mountain range, the temple was built. Well, let me tell you what the main aspect of temple worship was. It's sacrifice. The whole thing built around sacrifice. In fact, once a year, they sacrificed throughout the year. Once a year was the big one on Yom Kippur, where the high priest goes in the Holy of Holies and he sacrifices to forgive the sins of Israel. And so, all of history, from Isaac getting a substitute on Mount Moriah to David sacrificing to take away the wrath of God, to the temple, which all the sacrifices all throughout history, all on the same mountain range, pointing to one moment in time where Jesus would march into Jerusalem towards his death. He'd go into the temple, he'd cleanse the temple, he'd be arrested, and he'd march, the Bible says, not far, right outside the city walls. It literally says it's near the city, right outside the city walls. And he goes up a mountain, and the only mountain range that would have been right outside the city walls, Mount Moriah. In the same mountain range, he's sacrificed there. And everything points to him. It points to the one who substitutes. It points to the one who takes away God's wrath. It points to the one who all the sacrifices were always about. It's him. He's the one who bridges the gap between heaven and earth. And then grant me one more amazing, I think, nerdy fact as we keep studying Moriah. One last thing. Genesis 28, 10 through 19. This is a story where Isaac, we know Isaac is spared, right? He's not sacrificed. We just learned that. So Isaac later has a son. His son is named Jacob. Jacob decides one day he's going to travel and he's going to go find a wife. And so Jacob travels to go find a wife, and he stops somewhere to rest. He stops somewhere to sleep. He lays his head down, and he has this dream. And in this dream, he sees this ladder or bridge or stairway between heaven and earth, connecting heaven and earth. And it says that angels were ascending and descending on this bridge between heaven and earth. And he wakes up and he says this is verse 16 of Genesis 28. He says this, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Well, would it amaze you to know that where he happened to stop to rest was the same mountain range of Moriah? And I could prove that to you because I got a map. And don't question a guy with a map, so let's show our maps. They're really small, so you might have to trust me. But you can see that first map, Abraham and Isaac, that's his journey. And then you can see Jacob's journey, and that where that orange line stops, that's where Jacob stops to sleep, It's the same mountain range. It's the same place that he wakes up and he sees heaven meeting earth in a bridge. And then thousands of years later, the one who substitutes, the one who takes away the wrath, the one who fulfills all the sacrifices is also the one who makes a way, who builds the bridge between heaven and earth. And where does he do it? On the mountain range of Moriah. And this just gives us confidence in the thing we put our faith in the substitutionary atonement of Christ, that now and forever, all that he calls home, come home through his way, that he makes a way through his blood and through his sacrifice. And I think we'll close in a second, but one mistake we could make is be like, man, Moriah's awesome. We got to go to Moriah. We got to start revival in Moriah. I mean, the place of Moriah is great. We got to go there. And because we get really obsessed with things and materials and places. But the thing is, Moriah is a place that God's just using to tell his narrative. It's not about the place as much as it is about the story. And he uses it to tell his story. And we can get tripped up and be like, we got to worship in Moriah. That's where God is. Nope, God's here. I got to know the narrative. I got to know the story. And so to close, I want to go back to one verse here. This is verse 13. And I'll read it really briefly. It says, Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. Let's just pause there. So Abraham is standing over his son with a knife. Can you imagine? Let's just go into the emotion of that moment. What a brutal moment. I remember when I was a little kid, my little brother and I were fighting over the TV remote. I want to play video games. He want to watch something, whatever. And at some point in anger, I shoved him down, and I stood over him with my fist raised. And still, like, thinking about it makes me emotional. And in that moment, I began to cry because I had my fist raised over my younger brother. Like, what kind of brother was I? Abraham standing over his son with a knife. And God stops him, and he looks up, and he sees a ram. He sees a substitute so that he does not have to go through with this, regardless of what he believes. This is a hard moment, and he sees a substitute. And I promise you, I bet you, there is no more beautiful sight than that ram for Abraham. And that, my friends, is how we're supposed to see Jesus. Just so beautiful as he substitutes himself for you and me and your friends and your children and all who would place faith in Christ. What a beautiful sacrifice. It's why we can hang a cross in this building, an instrument of torture, and go, that's beautiful. Because he's substituted for me. We make Christianity about a lot of things sometimes, but I put your notes that the crux of Christianity is found when our gaze shifts from desperation to deliverance. So no matter where you're at today, wherever you're at today, my encouragement to you is just shift your gaze. Shift your gaze. Shift your gaze to the one who makes a way. Shift your gaze to the one who substitutes. Shift your gaze to the one who provides. That is where there's hope. That is where there's comfort. That's where there's joy. Amen.